Dr. Denver?
So actually right on your last point, Dan, which I guess this is open to any of the panels, but it strikes me that in drawing that analogy or contrast to financial regulation, there's actually this underlying issue of risk at play where FDA might be more immune to some of those attacks at present because it's seen as regulating a single compound, either food or a drug at a time, and we don't tend to think of a hazardous pharmaceutical, should there be one that's approved and later shown to cause side effects. We don't think of that making other drugs we take risky. In the same way that for financial instruments, bringing down one of them, the CDO-backed mortgage, brought down the entire economy, right? So that is that like this, the assumption that dispersal of the product across the society lowered risk in finance, we don't hold in medicine. In fact, we think the way to reduce the risk is to concentrate it in a couple of hundred or 1,000 people in the clinical trial.
I mean, I think that's a good point, Arthur. There's not the kind of what people might call systemic risk that's involved with a single product in medicine as there is with financial products. Although one of the things that I'm really fascinating about the current discussion, which I've been following, as everybody's been following, is the drift of a lot of talk towards, well, I wouldn't say it's a pre-approval or pre-market approval model, a more product-centered model of regulation, right? So one can argue that, well, a lot of our problems came when people sold bad mortgages, right, or bad mortgage contracts, and then in turn bundled those bad mortgages and then sold those and then bundled those and sold, you know, on and on and on. And each of the, you know, part of the regulatory solution that's being looked at, although it's not integrated, is to say, well, we should have an agency that sort of protects the selling of bad financial products to end user consumers. And then we should have a separate agency. This would not be Elizabeth Warren's agency. This would be another agency that's going to regulate the sale of bundled products like derivatives, over-the-counter derivatives, things like that, to other entities. So both in the world of consumer finance and systemic finance, we're drawing on these product metaphors. And I think the point about capture proofing, I think, is still going to be really, really crucial. I mean, it's funny because you see this, again, going back to the blogs, the conspiratorial views that are out there on the FDA, they're you know, web click or two away. Right? Just go to the Wall Street Journal editorial page. Just kidding. No, I'm not. But they can be from the left. People who just sort of distrust medicine. I mean, when I say to the, not the left, but a particular voice from the left. And they'll say, well, yeah, the FDA is in bed with drug companies. That's why, you know, pot or certain other drugs haven't been legalized for treatment of, you know, X, Y, and Z. Which is a similar argument that you saw with the Laetrile controversy. I mean, there was a rightist and a leftist element to that in the 1970s. And then you've got people on the right, probably some of the people who are sponsoring some of the lawsuits that Dr. Sharfstein was telling us about, also saying like, oh well, the FDA is basically captured in the old Stiglerian sense, and they're aligning with the big drug makers to sort of create entry barriers to the smaller or we haven't seen them yet, potential drug makers, right? And again, I've actually spent a big part of my career rebutting those capture stories because I don't think they're true, and I think the evidence on which they're premised is often lacks rigor. But to the extent that those stories can set in, and sometimes those stories can set in without lots of evidence, I think that creates governance problems for an agency like the FDA, just as it's going to create problems for these agencies.
I'm intrigued by the role of reputation in connection with this discussion. Reputation is a social science word, something like legitimacy. It talks about an interaction between the public or whoever it is who's controlling the reputation and the actors like the FDA. And I'm just wondering that the extent to which drug regulation, drug use has become much more of a public involved activity, taken by how much of the advertising, the full page ads in the New York Times are advertisements for drugs that never existed 5, 10 years ago, and the extent to which the blogs and the internet make reputation extremely fragile because any particular event suddenly gets onto YouTube or Facebook and gets all over the world. And does this affect the way in which agencies like the FDA and the drug industry will interact in the future?
Well, I do think that it's definitely true that the events that kind of play out over time in the book now play out very, very quickly. So every little thing gets picked up. One stray comment from someone gets misinterpreted like 100 times before you have a chance to get out there. And people who want to tell a particular story will pull that, and it's extremely challenging. So, you know, I think that we've learned early on that we can't expect to have people understand what we're trying to say, all of them, right away, all the time, and that we're going to wind up also with people understanding what we say and putting it in the wrong kind of context or just disagreeing and putting it out in kind of a particularly slanted way. And that's just part of the world that we inhabit. But I do think that that doesn't mean that our credibility is, you know, it may mean that it takes a few smaller hits, but I think that it also gives us the ability, we have a lot of different ways to really make statements about things. And it's an opportunity for us if we can, you know, for example, it's because of the internet that we can post, you know, all this performance data about what we're doing, and we can, you know, do webinars, and we can really explain what we're doing in a way that when we do a kind of complex risk communication, of which we're doing a lot more now, and I thought Professor Jasnoff's comments also really echo it, but you know, we do have to come, you know, we have many very new, unusual situations we have to communicate about, but if we can prepare ourselves well and go out well, we can really get the message out much further, much quicker than I think probably FDA could before. And generally, we will get, you know, the vast majority of the media really understanding what we're trying to say if we can prepare well. So I think it's new challenges for us, but I don't think it means that, you know, our credibility doesn't matter. It's sort of like, you know, on the news side, people say you've got all these bloggers, so people really will news just sort of filter out in a way that everyone has a perspective, and you don't really want the truth, you know, or from a relatively unbiased source. I don't personally think that's true. I think that you're interested in all these different views, but you really want to hear what happened. So I think there's a huge interest in having the agency really be the agency that speaks with credibility about things, even with all these voices out there. And it's our challenge, our responsibility to get our message out as well as we can using all the new tools.
I'll repress my belief, the rant I'd like to give about the need for nationalizing the pharmaceutical industry and try to widen that's why I sum up much of the last 10 minutes. But I wanted to broaden the discussion a bit because nobody said anything about the international role of the FDA because it seems clear that the number of people whose lives the FDA has a tremendous influence upon, the overwhelming majority of those people are beyond United States boundaries. I'm wondering how long this has gone on and if there's ever been any challenge to this situation. Thank you.